wanted to say a special thank you for your talk last night. So we have the TS Adia way of saying thank you. So if everyone would join in and thank Tim for his talk last night. Yeah, this is the one. The room was absolutely buzzing last night, so it was a wonderful opening for our 2021 convention. So today we've got the live question and answer session, and I had 5 people come with questions, so I've typed them all up and given Tim a little bit of time to consider them. And so we'll jump straight into our first question, which comes from none other than our very national president, John Forstemans. And the question is, the TS has had a great influence on the world since its inception 145 years ago. What do you think is the prime gift the TS can give to the world today?
Well, first of all, it's very, very good to be back with you all there in Wellington, no less. You don't know how fortunate you are. I'm here in the U.S., which has a bad reputation for pandemic response. It does kind of make me wish for my days when I was with you there in New Zealand. But they'll come again. I also should say that my wife Lily wanted to be sure that I extend her greetings to all of her many friends there in New Zealand.
Well, please pass our greetings to her too. Okay?
Yeah. Just in terms of the TS's impact on global culture, as part of our history, I think sometimes we even lose sight of how profound the impact has been from this whole theosophical movement. We're very much aware of such things as the introduction of many previously exotic ideas into normal sort of conversation in the Western world. I mean, certainly ideas such as reincarnation, karma, the multi-dimensional nature of the human being and the universe, self-responsibility in terms of spiritual unfoldment. These were ideas that they were not part of the global conversation with the Theosophical Society's beginnings. Of course, now it's very common, and there are many groups around the world that are addressing themselves to aspects of these issues. But just beyond even this conceptual sort of impact, the Theosophical Society in the world of the arts, in the world of music, in the world of politics, because I spend so much of my time in India, the regard that the Theosophical Society is held in that country, due to its role in their independence movement, is enormous. It's unlike any other place in the world. Also because I function out of our international headquarters, I can tell you that the kind of growing interest in the academic world in the effects of the Theosophical movement on global culture in some of the most remote places. I mean, probably right now there are 5 or 6 books being written related to the TS's impact in Japan, in the modern art movement, in Prague, in Czechoslovakia. So many places that we don't even imagine. So this is our history and the way in which things have been shifted in a global. So that's the past. So in terms of the TS's gift to the future, one of the things that has already been done is we have really seeded global human consciousness with certain key ideas. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, but it seems that every day I am surprised when you turn on the television and there are advertisements for mention apps, that you can put on your phone. It's gotten to this point. But I think the concepts have been provided. The intellectual basis for the study and possible understanding of theosophy has been provided. And so at this point, there's a very different thing that we have to be focused on, I do believe. We will never cease from trying to deepen our knowledge base. It's endless. We will never cease from trying to deepen that about the spiritual life, about theosophy. But really the thing that we have before us is the same thing that was before us when this was begun. It was the cause of HPB's frequent disappointment as well. The idea that there is this thing we call theosophy that has a conceptual basis, but it wasn't introduced solely for that purpose. The overwhelming idea has been that this is something that not only can be, but must be lived. It's not something that is an abstraction. And it's up to us, really, to find ways to express the idea of unity and the deep sorts of insights that come from exploring that, to express those in our lives and in our practices. Until those sorts of things have been, until we have examples of that within the theosophical world, then our gift to the world will be lacking. And so this is always something that we have to be aware of. I have been fond of saying in the past that, to my mind, the Theosophical Society is perfect in every way. The only problem that there has been throughout its history, the only problem that there is now is the people. It's the only thing that limits our expression of perfection, our inability to respond to one another in this familial sort of way. It's a challenge. I mean, you take an average family, where people are born and have the same blood, and there are difficulties. But until and unless that is something that we can rise to, then we will always fall short of what our potential to really deeply influence humanity.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the bunch of sticks, isn't it? Where together nothing on earth can break them, as long as there's not that division, isn't it? Is really where we're going there. So yeah. Okay. Thank you for that insightful response. Now, the next question, it's one about something Krishnamurti said. So Krishnamurti was inspired to write at the feet of the Master when he was 14. And you mentioned last night in your talk about are we being led? And when Krishnamurti in the 80s was in conversation with the philosopher and quantum physicist David Bohm, he raised the question, are we able to be led? After considering that humanity appears not to have woken up at all in the last few thousand years, we are still making the same mistakes. Do you think humanity is able to be led?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a challenging question. I think if we look at it, when I was talking yesterday, we were talking about lead me from the unreal to the real. And those sorts of ideas. And in order to be led, we have to be leadable, of course. Are we? I think on a superficial level, I think very often we are much too easily led. Again,
Yeah.
as a resident of the United States, I
Scary.
I have never before been in the position of being embarrassed or ashamed about my nationality. There have been causes for those ideas to arise. But we are led too easily, often because we mistake belief for something deeper. As long as we fall into the category of believers, then beliefs change with information. Different information leads to different beliefs. And you see people flip-flopping in this way all the time. Religions very often are very keen on having believers. But I think within theosophical circles, within the ageless wisdom tradition, what is really demanded of us is to come to know something. And that's a very different thing. So, what is it that when we look inside ourselves, what is it we can say we actually know? And based on that, that will set the direction. That's the thing that will make it possible for us to hear or to see something of real depth. I think generally our habit has been to come to beliefs and then judge the quality or the character of something according to those beliefs that we have accepted or adopted. Mostly they're other people's beliefs. Mm-hmm. But it's a very different thing to be able to be open. And I think in this quality of openness, we become capable of being led. When it comes to humanity as a whole, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the recent history of things, it's very easy to say that not much has changed. When you look at the history over 1,000 or 2,000 years, not much has changed. And I think really this idea of uplifting humanity is something that takes a sort of patient mind. We're not there yet. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we're far from where we can be. But every single one of us that is able to find some deeper level of peace, deeper level of understanding within ourselves as individuals, it uplifts everything. But imperceptibly. Our drop in the ocean doesn't make a great big difference initially. But I think in everything, we really have to adopt the idea that this isn't a short-term affair we're involved with. And with that, we can become a little bit more patient, a little bit more forgiving of ourselves and our fellow laggards.
I was just thinking, it is one person at a time, isn't it? Is really what you're saying there.
Yeah, it is, but at the same time, anyone who actually experiences some degree of illumination, that's something that has a much deeper impact. That affects many.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we point ourselves toward, that possibility.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd just like to thank John Carver for that question. I forgot to mention at the beginning there, that's who the question came from. So just give Tim a wave, John, so he knows who wrote the question. Okay, all right. My next question, this is from Chris Hensley, who you probably remember. Chris, wave.
Hi.
All right. Now, Chris's question is in reference to Tim's comments about the consumption of meat and nicotine by the founders. She's not making any judgment here. Would Tim care to comment on the idea of human beings taking on energy from food that relates to the energy of the source?
Very garbled, I'm sorry.
Slow down.
Okay. So would Tim care to comment on the idea of human beings taking on energy from food that relates to the energy of the source? For example, plant matter being of a non-disturbing nature through to the increasing but low disturbance from cold-blooded animals as fish, and the more aggressive nature of red-blooded animal food. So, how would you like to comment there?
Well, I think in large measure, from its beginnings, the Theosophical movement has been closely associated with a vegetarian diet. And for good reason. I think the suggestions that Chris made there are, we can think of as accurate. There's Annie Besant said the same thing about taking on the magnetism of the foods that we eat. And so as animal, then that magnetism we take on as well. I sometimes do point out, as I did the other day, that our founders were, of course, meat eaters and smokers. It's a funny thing to me sometimes, because when you think about it, some of the auxiliary organizations that have formed within the Theosophical Society would not permit Olcott Blavatsky to join them at this time. So it's a strange idea, but things change. But the idea of purity in diet, we would say. The old idea of you are what you eat is really what we're talking about at all levels. And so if you're eating something that is a cause of intense suffering to other living things, then that is something that either you have to very forcefully try and deny, or that becomes something that you're building into your system as well. And I do believe that one of the things that comes with a non-vegetarian diet is that really we have to really be strongly engaged in resisting and denying the fact of how this food has come to our plate. I'm not even talking about the magnetism or the fact that these animals are in a state of fear when they are slaughtered. Not even that. But the basic idea that in order for this to be your meal, it has required the taking of the life of something that values its living in no less degree than you do. And so there has to be some sort of denial or refusal to confront that for most people. And that's more of a massive psychological barrier than it is a health issue, I think. Everything that lives wants to continue living and wants to thrive. Probably all of you are aware of Joseph Campbell, the great writer on mythology. But he was a very good friend of the Theosophical Society, and he would frequently come to speak at Crotona in Ojai, California.
And he was a jokester too. So at one point he was out there at Cortona and he was looking at the crowd and he was saying, all of you Theosophists, you're so proud of being vegetarians. But can you imagine how a carrot feels when one of you approaches it? Says it quakes in fear. Everything lives. And in order to live something, the way it works is that in order to live until we reach the stage of being breatharians, something will perish in order for something else to survive. That's part of this cycle. But the choice that we make is, where it is in our good conscience, we can fit into this particular cycle of destruction and birth.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So a psychological issue each one of us is having to deal with at some point. So nobody's getting out of it, of dealing with that somewhere, isn't it?
Sometime.
Yeah, sometime. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chris, for your question. Now, next, I have a question from Carmel Levick. Now, she's quoting from your talk, 3 quotes: the higher mind, the inner soul, the journey to immortality, and the Vedas state, the soul is immortal. Can you speak more about the soul?
Well, from a theosophical, technical point of view, when we talk about the soul, what we are specifically talking about is the higher manas, or the higher mind, and buddhi. So the higher mentality and the Buddhic nature, as speaking of it as a unit. So that's the kind of technical background for it. But in terms of, what might be meant by that, we think in terms of the soul as that spiritualized dimension of our being that comes into the world through the avenue of birth. It associates itself with the body, and it accompanies us during the course of this life. The idea that we have in terms of a spiritual path or a spiritual practice is to try and deepen our connection with this soul, to provide a more transparent access for the soul to influence the personality. So, the problems that we encounter, of course, are that we all have very strong and very highly conditioned personalities. From the moment of birth, we are shaping these things, and we're developing identities that we cling to, and many of which don't really allow for the influence of what in the Bible is described as this still small voice of the soul. Even though it's always speaking, it's overwhelmed in general by our rush of activity and our inability to really find genuine quiet inside of us. And so a main part of the path is the cultivation of an attitude of quiet that allows us opportunities to at least occasionally hear the whisperings of this soul. In much more developed individuals, we find that those are people who have the capacity to tune into this influence in a regular manner. Or, even so much that this is their constant companion. And that's something that, theosophical literature points in this direction. And sometimes I use an example of being at a party with music playing, conversations happening, many people there, people having something to drink, something to eat. And in the midst of all this, over in a corner, there is a wise woman or a wise man. And they're in the corner whispering truth, whispering deep things. But while the party is going, we can't hear any of it. But the only way that we can hear it is to make the effort to move a little closer. And this is what we generally call prayer or meditation or contemplation. We move closer, step away from the noise, and listen. And in those moments that we are enabled to listen and to hear, we can walk away, go back to the party, but carry something of meaning with us. And then we also always, once we have made this connection, then it becomes much, much easier for us to go back to resource ourselves in this manner. And this is kind of the functioning of the soul in our day-to-day life.
Thank you. I think you're alluding to why we're here, really there. All right, now our final question is from Julia Tarnowski. Where are you, Julia?
Yeah. Hello, Tim. We had lunch together in Adyar this time last year.
Remember, you were in Adyar just recently. It's good to see you again.
It's lovely to be here and to hear your voice again.
Now, Julia's question. I feel often that I am conditioned to give in a transaction where there is a return. How is it possible to give without expectation of some return?
Well, that is a challenge, isn't it? I mean, all of everything that we do, as you note, you put a seed in the ground, you put it in the ground with the expectation of it growing and yielding something of benefit. We oftentimes we even do something like we tell someone, we mean it, but we tell someone, I love you, but with the expectation that we're looking to hear it in return. So as you say, we are conditioned in this way. And it's something that is deep. The fact that you can recognize it is part of the process of becoming free of it, quite honestly. There's this expression that the disease that is hidden cannot be healed. The unexamined life is one that does not provide us with avenues for openness or expansion. So it begins with this sort of questioning. How can we become unconditioned, I guess you could say? And that's a challenge. It's one of those things, again, that takes place perhaps gradually, but we can make beginnings. One of the areas that I find is most under-acknowledged. In most of the Western world, we find ourselves in communities that tend to be certainly a very strong Christian influence. So that aspect of the ageless wisdom teachings is more emphasized. But one of the strong points that was made during the life of the teaching of the Christ was the power of prayer. We could say prayer or meditation. To my mind, prayer is a recognition of the divine wherever we can find it. It's not words that we say, or it's not begging that we do for something that we have not deserved. But there is this emphasis that is, as far as I have ever seen, has not been taken up by any church or any particular movement of which I'm aware. The emphasis being that what you must do if you want to call yourself a spiritual being is that you have to learn how to pray for your enemies. Who does that? Pray for your enemy. So the people from whom you can expect no return, you focus your prayers toward them. That's the beginning of an unconditioning, because you start off knowing that this is not a direction that you're going to get the thank yous from. And so that step in this conditioning of the expectation is removed. Pray for your enemies. Meditate for their well-being. Again, being an American citizen at this time in our turn of the cycle, I find I'm about the only one doing that.
Oh dear.
But it's a challenge, of course. Because every one of us, if you have lived, 10 years in this world, you have had things that have been done to you. Every one of us has had wounds of various sorts.
Stand down.
And sometimes it is of such a deep nature that even the thought of those who committed these things causes deep disturbances within us. But, those are the sorts of areas where there is the most possibility for this type of expansion. If we can sincerely and genuinely focus our minds on the upliftment of those who harm others, including ourselves, then it doesn't mean that you don't do things to prevent harm. That's not the idea at all. But to be able to have a mind that can embrace all others, not just the ones that we like, is a difficult sort of training for ourselves that we have to engage in at some point or other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thought. I can't say I have two.
Okay. Actually, I think that's a wonderful place to start, because especially at this time with all of these challenges, I'm sure everyone may find someone somewhere where they could practice this. So, yeah. That's all I have for the questions, and thank you, Julia, for the questions. I'm not going to take any more from the floor because it's too hard to get those across with the sound, the way we've got the sound. So what I was going to ask you was, have you spent a lot of time in that room since you've been in lockdown?
Well, quite honestly, this is in my home in Chicago. This is I'll tell you what it is. It is a small room, but it is my office, my meditation area, my study, my music room, and occasionally my workout room. And in total, it's about an 8 by 12 foot room. But it's, yes, I have, and probably you have seen various Zoom discussions that have taken place from this very location.
So in a way, it isn't all bad, because your outreach is possibly more than normal because of Zoom and the things that have been happening.
Oh, that's completely true. I mean, I had 1 week where during 1 week, I was in Mexico, Ukraine, Philippines, India twice,
Italy, and some other places, I don't remember. But only because in the past, again, our thinking didn't permit. If you were going to hear something, it required someone getting on a plane and, going through the whole jet lag experience and then speaking. It's not the same, quite honestly, as a complete presence, but it is something that has a lot of benefits. I mean, we just finished our international convention. I hope all of you participated.
Yes.
Some of you are hanging your heads, which means it's probably.
Yes.
But to those of you that did, it was really,
It's amazing.
we would not have done it, it was all online. We would not have done it that way had we not been forced to by this pandemic. Having been forced to go online, the result was this was the highest level of participation that there has ever been for any convention for the Theosophical Society. 73 countries were represented. 3,000 registries participated, and they were sharing the link with others, so it was more than that. And so we had it translated this year into 9 different languages, 5 European languages and 4 Indian languages. It was a huge undertaking, but it was something that allowed for participation among our global membership in ways that would not have been possible otherwise. It took more than 100 people whose involvement and volunteering in this in order to produce it. And every single one of them came out of the experience feeling as if, even though it was online, it was all digital, that they were linked into a global team that was really practicing Theosophy in action. It's been a wonderful experience, quite honestly. And so this is something that, again, we find ourselves in 2020, the year 2020, and I found so many people who were saying, I can't wait for this year to end. And, but it wasn't all bad.
No.
In fact, things that we have learned out of this experience, we will continue as we go forward with many of the things related to the TS. I'll tell you this. I remember, it's been a number of years ago now, but there was a big thing in the United States where Mount St. Helens, it was a volcano out in the northwest, in the Seattle area. It blew up. And it was one of those things that they knew it was going to blow, so there were cameras and everything was there. And it was the most remarkable devastation you could imagine. I mean, all around it, there were these old 80-foot pine trees. I flew over that area, going to Theosophical Society in Seattle one time. It was about, it was a couple of years after this volcano blew up, and the pilot took the plane over the area. You've never seen anything like it. I mean, to look at it, it was completely gray, lifeless. The trees, these huge trees, had just been blown down just like little matchsticks. And all of them, the base of the tree was all pointed toward the point of the explosion. It was like a fan going out. I'd never seen anything like it. Came back again to Seattle. It was about 10 years later. Pilot took us over Mount St. Helens again, and what was completely lifeless, a moonscape 10 years prior, was now the most vibrant, verdant, green area filled with wildlife. So, the soil
had been enriched in a way that could not have been possible without all of this volcanic ash that had come up from the earth. So, we see devastation and we see hardship. That's for real. But nothing is all bad and nothing is all good. And we have to be able to see so that we can draw on that for our future.
Yeah. It's like that, what's that? Regeneration, isn't it? When it comes about, it's required that it has to be taken to the ground, doesn't it? Yeah.
And ultimately, we'll all be taken to the ground. We'll be food for something.
I was just thinking that.
I mean, it's going to happen. So better to recognize it and then move on with your life.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure how we are for time. Okay, well, I would like to thank you on behalf of all of us here in New Zealand, and please pass not just to yourself, to Lily and to Angelique, our love and blessings, to your wonderful family as well. And we will all say thank you to you for being part of our 2021 convention. Okay, we're all good?
Thank you.
Thank you.